Picture this. A beautiful four-bedroom home in the suburbs of Toronto, freshly renovated, perfectly staged, sitting on the market for 90 days, with not a single serious offer. The seller drops the price by $50,000, then another $30,000. Still nothing. The open house that used to attract 20 eager couples now sees maybe 2 or 3 people wandering through, taking pictures, and leaving without saying a word. This is not a horror story from some distant economic collapse. This is happening right now across Ontario, and if you own property, are thinking about buying, or simply want to understand what is unfolding in one of the most important real estate markets in North America, you need to pay attention to what I am about to share with you. Before we dive into this, if you find value in content that breaks down complex market situations into clear, actionable insights, take a second and hit that subscribe button. It costs you nothing, but it helps this channel continue bringing you the information that mainstream media often glosses over or ignores entirely. Now let us get into what is really happening in Ontario. The Ontario housing market has effectively slammed shut. Buyers have vanished almost overnight, and the consequences are beginning to ripple through every corner of the province. For years, we heard that Canadian real estate, especially in Ontario, was untouchable. Prices would always go up. Demand would always exceed supply. Your house was your retirement plan, your wealth generator, your ticket to financial security. But something fundamental has shifted, and it happened faster than almost anyone predicted. Let me give you some numbers that paint the picture clearly. Home sales across the Greater Toronto Area dropped by over 15% compared to the same period last year. In some suburban markets, the decline has been even more dramatic, with certain regions seeing drops of 25 to 30% in transaction volumes. But here is the part that really tells the story. New listings are piling up. Inventory levels have surged to their highest point in nearly a decade in some areas. Homes that would have sold in days during the pandemic frenzy are now sitting for weeks, sometimes months, with sellers growing increasingly desperate. So, what happened? Where did all the buyers go? The answer is complex, but it essentially comes down to a perfect storm of economic factors that have combined to crush demand at the exact moment when supply was beginning to normalize. Let us break this down piece by piece. First, and perhaps most obviously, interest rates changed everything. When the Bank of Canada began its aggressive rate hiking cycle to combat inflation, it fundamentally altered the math of home buying in Ontario. A family that could comfortably afford $1 million home at 2% interest suddenly found themselves stretched thin at 5 or 6%. Monthly payments on a typical Toronto area mortgage increased by anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000 compared to what they would have been just a few years earlier. That is not a rounding error. That is the difference between being able to buy and being priced out entirely. But interest rates alone do not explain the complete evaporation of buyer activity. Something deeper is at play, and it has to do with confidence, or rather, the total collapse of it. Canadian consumers are tapped out. Household debt levels in this country are among the highest in the developed world, with the average Canadian owing about $1.80 for every dollar of disposable income. For years, people stretched themselves to get into the market, believing that rising home values would bail them out. Now, with prices stagnant or declining in many areas, that equity cushion has disappeared, and people are sitting on massive mortgages with no easy exit. The psychological shift cannot be overstated. During the pandemic boom, there was a fear of missing out that drove people to make offers sight unseen, waiving every condition, bidding hundreds of thousands over asking. That fear has been replaced by a different kind of fear entirely. Today, potential buyers are terrified of catching a falling knife. They are looking at the market and asking themselves why they would pay $800,000 for a house today when it might be worth $750,000 in 6 months. That wait-and-see mentality has become a self-fulfilling prophecy. The longer buyers wait, the more inventory builds up, the more pressure there is on prices, and the more justified buyers feel in continuing to wait. Let me tell you about what is happening on the ground, because the statistics only tell part of the story. Real estate agents across Ontario are describing a market unlike anything they have experienced in their careers. One agent in Hamilton told me that he had a listing for a detached home priced at $699,000. 5 years ago, this home would have triggered a bidding war and sold for $750,000 or higher. Today, after 12 weeks on the market and 2 price reductions, they finally received an offer. It was for $580,000. The seller, who had bought the home in 2021 near the peak, would have to bring money to the closing table just to sell. They rejected the offer, but now they are stuck, unable to sell, unable to move forward with their lives. This scenario is playing out thousands of times across the province. Sellers who need to move for work, sellers going through divorces, sellers who have already purchased another property conditionally on selling their current one. They are all trapped in a market that has frozen solid. And here is where it gets really concerning. Many of these sellers are not in strong financial positions. They bought at the peak with minimal down payments. Their mortgages are coming up for renewal at rates that are double or triple what they originally locked in. Some are already falling behind on payments. The specter of forced sales and foreclosures, something Canada largely avoided during the 2008 financial crisis, is now becoming a genuine possibility. The ripple effects extend far beyond individual homeowners. Think about all the industries that depend on a functioning real estate market. Mortgage brokers are seeing their business dry up. Home inspectors have empty calendars. Moving companies are laying off workers. Furniture stores that boomed during the pandemic as people upgraded their living spaces are now slashing prices and closing locations. Renovation contractors who were booked solid for 18 months in advance are suddenly scrambling for work. The Ontario housing market is not just real estate. It is a massive economic engine, and that engine is sputtering badly. Let us talk about who is most affected by this shutdown. First-time buyers, the group that everyone claims to want to help, are in a peculiar position. On one hand, falling prices should be good news for them. Finally, after years of being priced out, homes might become affordable again. But the reality is more complicated. Those same interest rate increases that are pushing prices down are also making mortgages harder to qualify for and more expensive to carry. A first-time buyer looking at a $500,000 home today might actually face higher monthly payments than someone who bought a $600,000 home in 2020 at rock-bottom rates. The math simply does not work for many young Canadians, and they know it, which is why they have stopped even trying to enter the market. Investors who drove so much of the demand during the boom years have also retreated dramatically. The calculus that made buying rental properties attractive has completely changed. When you could borrow at 2% and rents were rising, being a landlord made sense. Now, with borrowing costs above 5% and rental increases capped by provincial regulations, many investment properties are cash flow negative. Landlords are paying out of pocket every month just to hold on to properties that may be declining in value. Some are deciding to cut their losses and sell, adding even more inventory to an already glutted market. Others are trapped, unable to sell without realizing massive losses, forced to continue subsidizing their tenants' housing costs indefinitely. The condo market in Toronto deserves special attention because it has become ground zero for this crisis. During the boom, developers launched project after project, and investors snapped up units before they were even built, planning to flip them for profit or rent them out. Now those buildings are completing construction and delivering units into a market that does not want them. The rental market, while still tight, has seen vacancy rates tick up as immigration patterns shift and as more supply comes online. Condo rents in some Toronto neighborhoods have actually declined year over year, something that seemed impossible just 18 months ago. New investors who bought pre-construction at peak 2021 prices are now facing a brutal reality. Their units are worth less than what they paid. The rental income does not cover their carrying costs. They cannot sell without taking a significant loss. Some are simply walking away, forfeiting their deposits, rather than closing on properties that will immediately put them underwater. This wave of investor capitulation is adding downward pressure on prices and creating a doom loop that feeds on itself. What about the government response to all of this? So far, policymakers seem paralyzed, caught between competing priorities. They want housing to be affordable for young Canadians, which suggests letting prices fall further. But they also do not want to trigger a broader economic crisis or devastate the net worth of existing homeowners, many of whom are counting on their home equity for retirement. There is no easy answer, no policy lever that can be pulled to fix this situation cleanly. The federal government has introduced various measures aimed at first-time buyers, including expanded mortgage amortization periods and tax-free savings accounts for down payments. But these programs amount to rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. They do not address the fundamental issue, which is that homes in Ontario still cost far too much relative to incomes, even after recent price declines. The average home in the Greater Toronto Area still sells for over $1 million. The average household income is around $100,000. That ratio is still completely out of whack with historical norms and with what exists in most other developed countries. Some analysts are predicting that this correction has much further to go. They point to the wave of mortgage renewals coming in 2024 and 2025. When homeowners who locked in at ultra-low rates will be forced to renew at current levels. The payment shock for some of these borrowers will be severe, potentially thousands of dollars per month more than they are currently paying. If even a fraction of these homeowners are forced to sell, it could release another flood of inventory into an already saturated market, pushing prices down further still. Others take a more optimistic view, arguing that the fundamental demand drivers remain intact. Immigration to Canada continues at record levels, with over 1 million new permanent residents expected over the next few years, many of whom will settle in Ontario. Population growth creates housing demand. Eventually, they argue, this demand will absorb the current excess supply, and prices will stabilize or even resume their upward trajectory. The question is how long that takes and how much pain is inflicted in the meantime. There is also the wild card of what happens if the economy tips into a full-blown recession. So far, Canada has avoided that fate, with employment remaining relatively strong despite all the rate hikes. But cracks are starting to appear. Unemployment has ticked up modestly. Business investment is weak. Consumer spending is flagging as people tighten their belts. If job losses accelerate, if people start losing their incomes rather than just facing higher mortgage payments, the housing market decline could turn into a full-scale crash rather than an orderly correction. For anyone watching this and trying to figure out what to do, let me offer some perspective. If you are a potential buyer who has been waiting on the sidelines, your patience may eventually be rewarded, but do not expect a sudden crash that brings prices down 50% overnight. Real estate markets typically adjust slowly, grinding lower over years, rather than collapsing all at once. The best approach is to focus on your own financial situation. Make sure you have a stable income, a solid down payment, and the ability to afford payments at current rates. Do not buy based on expectations of future price appreciation. Buy because you want to live in the home and can afford it today. If you are a seller who needs to move, the hard truth is that you may need to accept a price that feels painful compared to what your neighbor got 2 years ago. The market does not care about your purchase price or your emotional attachment to the property. It only cares about what buyers are willing to pay today. And right now, buyers are not willing to pay peak prices for anything other than truly exceptional properties. Overpricing your home in this market is a recipe for frustration and a prolonged, expensive selling process. If you are an existing homeowner with no immediate plans to sell, try not to obsess over month-to-month price movements. Real estate is a long-term asset. Values fluctuate. What matters is whether you can afford your payments and whether the home meets your family's needs. The paper losses you might see if you check comparable sales are only real if you actually sell. Sit tight, continue making your payments, and focus on what you can control. The Ontario housing story is far from over. We are likely in the middle innings of a correction that could take years to fully play out. The excesses of the pandemic boom, the speculative frenzy, the blind faith that prices could only ever go up, all of that is now unwinding. It is painful for those caught on the wrong side, but it may ultimately be necessary to restore some semblance of sanity and affordability to a market that had become completely detached from economic reality. What we are witnessing is a generational shift in how Canadians think about housing. For decades, the belief was nearly universal that buying a home was the smartest financial move anyone could make, that real estate was a guaranteed path to wealth. That belief drove people to take on enormous debts, to sacrifice other financial goals, to stretch themselves to the breaking point. Now a whole generation of buyers is learning that real estate can go down as well as up, that leverage cuts both ways, that what goes up can and does come down. The implications of this shift will be felt for years to come. Young people who watch their older siblings or parents profit from real estate are now watching friends and family members struggle with underwater mortgages and unsellable homes. Their attitudes toward home ownership, toward debt, toward risk itself may be permanently altered. This could have profound effects on everything from family formation to geographic mobility to the overall economy. For now, the Ontario housing market remains in a state of suspended animation. Buyers have retreated to the sidelines, waiting for clarity, waiting for prices to bottom, waiting for some sign that it is safe to enter. Sellers are holding on, hoping for a rebound, reluctant to accept the new reality. And between them sits a growing mountain of inventory, a testament to the boom years and a burden that will take time to work through. The story I have shared with you today is still being written. There will be twists and turns ahead that none of us can predict. Interest rates could fall faster than expected, reigniting demand. Or the economy could weaken more than anticipated, accelerating the decline. Government policy could shift in unexpected ways. Global events could intervene. All we can do is stay informed, think critically, and make decisions based on our own circumstances, rather than headlines or emotions. I hope this video has given you a clearer picture of what is unfolding in Ontario and why it matters. The housing market touches everyone, whether you own a home, rent, or are simply trying to build a life in this province. Understanding these dynamics is not just about making smart investment decisions. It is about understanding the economic forces that shape our daily lives. If you found this valuable, please take a moment to hit the like button. It helps more people discover this content and join the conversation. Drop a comment below and tell me what you are seeing in your local market. Are prices dropping? Is inventory building up? Are buyers returning or continuing to stay away? I read every comment and genuinely want to hear your perspectives. And if you have not already, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss future videos breaking down the most important economic and financial stories of the day. We are living through unusual times, and having access to clear, thoughtful analysis has never been more important. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.